Hey buddy, it's Peter. In this video, I'm going to be talking to people who have registered for the motorcycle training course or who have just completed the motorcycle training course, or if you're a new rider or a returning rider. And I'm going to use two Kawasaki's to talk about that. Now, I'm a fan of Kawasaki. I have biases up front. I'm working in partnership here with Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports, which is the largest volume Kawasaki dealer in the country. So yeah, I'm going to show some biases to Kawasaki, but whether you're interested in Kawasaki or not, I think this video will be helpful for you because I've looked around and I think there's things missing in that new bike conversation, things to look for in that first bike, maybe new bike after the course. So I'm going to use two bikes here to go through some things that I would look for if I was a new rider, some things I wish I knew and some other friends of mine wish they knew when they were new riders just finishing the course. And we'll talk about all of those things by using these two bikes as examples, and also talk about what to look for in a dealer and a whole bunch of things. So I don't know how I've titled this video by the time you're watching it, but I'm hoping that I've attracted those people to talk about these two bikes. And again, whether these are specifically of interest to you, I'm hoping that I can still use these to show information. And it really is going to be a review of these two bikes, but from the perspective of a new rider, somebody who's just finished the course. So hopefully that will make sense. I'm doing a little different than I normally do, but give me some grace in that. And again, like I say, I do review bikes here on this channel every single day, so if it feels like a bit of a review, that is my default way of talking about bikes. But I still think I have some information to share, and hopefully that can help you out. So do me a favor, hit subscribe if you're interested in either of these two bikes, or if you're a new rider, and let me know in the comments section the kinds of things, the questions that you may have as a new rider or a returning rider or something like that. And if I can help you, I'll answer you in the comment section, but I'll also be able to come back to you in future videos, because bikes like these, I can come back to again and again and again. And my job here, working with Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports, is to make sure that I give you as much information as I possibly can to give you the information that you want so that you feel comfortable when it comes time to buy a motorcycle. That was a really long intro. Let's get going with the video. So the first thing I want to talk about is new bike versus used bike, and obviously I'm going to have a bias towards new bikes, right? Well, maybe not. There's a lot of good reasons to buy a used bike, and the biggest reason to buy a used bike as your first bike or as your first bike out of the course is because they cost less, or they can cost less to purchase. So that obviously, if that's something that matters to you, then that's great. Hopefully this video will still matter to you as far as the things that I would look for in a bike. Now, there are a lot of good reasons to buy new bikes. First of all, you can finance them. So sometimes instead of having to come up with all that money up front, you can break that down in monthly payments, and then you're not buying a bike that has maybe worn out brakes or aged out tires, or that's been down a few too many times and has damage that you're not sure how it's going to affect the bike. You can make sure that you've got, brake pedals that work and clutch levers and all that work. Things aren't worn out. You don't have to deal with someone who maybe didn't change the oil enough, or somebody who stripped the drain plug, or somebody who had all kinds of issues that they've created on their bike. You don't have to worry about buying a bike that they've handed on. So there's lots of reasons to buy a used bike. There's also lots of reasons to buy a new bike. I'm not going to get into that debate. Whatever's best for you, I wouldn't argue with you. My first bike was a used bike, but there's lots of reasons to buy a new bike first, and lots of people I know have bought a new bike as a first bike and been totally happy as well. So new versus used, that's definitely a debate. We're going to talk about new bikes, and if you do buy a new Kawasaki, especially here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, within 90 days of doing the course. So if you have the course booked, you get a discount on Kawasaki motorcycles. So if you want to buy the bike first and then do your course, as long as the course is booked within 90 days, Kawasaki will give you a discount. If you do your course first within the next 90 days, Kawasaki will give you a discount. So there are reasons to do that course and buy the bike. And of course, a lot of you know, for insurance purposes, it is also a good idea to have that course done. And in some places it's mandatory to have that course done for your insurance. So let's keep going on and now start talking about these two bikes and why I chose these to demonstrate as things to look for in a new bike. So the two bikes that I'm going to show you today are very popular beginner bikes, and I already have a bias and I'm going to put that up front. The Z400 or the Ninjas 400 are the two bikes that I recommend the most to new riders. But this Supermoto, this is the KLX 300 SM. That SM stands for Supermoto, and this looks like a dirt bike, but if you look at the tires, and I'll show you them later, this is purely a street bike. So I'm assuming if you've done the course, you're focusing on street riding, and that's why I chose both these bikes. And I want to show you both these bikes as things that you can consider. And we're going to start with the Supermoto first, and then move on to the one that, like I said, the one that I recommend to more people. And it'll depend on the type of riding you want to do, but let's get going with an up-close look at this Supermoto. So the KLX 300 SM, what is a Supermoto? Well, first of all, a Supermoto looks like a dirt bike, but essentially what makes it a Supermoto is it's not just the different tires, but it's a smaller sized rim and the tire that make it a Supermoto. Now this one has a few extra little things that I kind of like that make it Supermoto-ish, but basically that's what it takes. So it's not taking a dirt bike and putting road tires on it, it's taking the road size tires as well. So this one actually has, I think, the exact same size front tire and the same width rear tire as the Z400 or Ninja 400, whichever one of those. They're both the same basic bike. And what that does here is it gives you something that is very, very fun, very controllable. And really what the Supermoto class is, it's a racing type class bike, it's a sport type class, and it's also a bit of a stunt kind of bike. And that can actually be very fun for a new rider. First of all, it's a small engine. It's a 300 or so cc bike. The difference with this one is it's a single cylinder, where the Z400 is a twin cylinder. So single cylinder bikes in general give you a good amount of torque, oftentimes a little bit lower in the rev range, even though this one makes peak torque up a little higher in the rev range. We'll talk about that, it's a little different. But it kind of has a punchy gearbox, you can wheelie with this kind of thing. Where it kind of runs out of steam is high-speed highway riding. So if you're doing high-speed highway riding, and that's your primary day-to-day kind of driving, this one's probably not the best. Now, it does offer you a few other things that are kind of fun. The one reason that I find it a little bit more difficult to recommend to a beginner is the taller seat height. So if you're about my size, this shouldn't affect you at all. And I'll show you right now. I'm about 6 feet tall. You could be certainly well shorter than me. I'll put the kickstand out of the way. I am flat-footing this bike easily. What's great about these bikes though, is they are extremely lightweight and they have a good square handlebar, or a big wide handlebar, so they're very easy to drive. You sit very upright, which is quite comfortable, and you've really got a lot of control. What's cool about the plastic on this bike is maybe you're concerned about dropping your first bike. Well, there's a lot of things here that are kind of good. You'll notice on the Z400 when we get to that, it's got an exhaust down here. You drop the Z400 on this side, on the exhaust side, you're going to damage the exhaust. This one here, it's tucked up, and it's tucked up behind this plastic that can take a beating. So if you were to drop a bike like this, you probably can just pick it up and keep going, no damage. Maybe some scuff marks, that kind of thing, but you're not cracking any plastic, you're not doing a whole lot of damage. It's kind of that dirt bike feel, which is, made to be durable. It's a different kind of plastic. So if you are concerned about dropping a bike, or you want to do some stuff like jumping off curbs and that kind of thing, and maybe not drop the bike, and if you do, it is what it is, you can sort of have this bike take a little bit more abuse. Now, single cylinder engines can be a little bit more vibrating. That's why switching from a dirt bike to a road bike, what they usually do is they add a little bit of rubber padding here, and you have that rubber padding, which is going to make it nice. That being said, this is a really sporty bike to go stoplight to stoplight in town, up to 80km/h roads, zipping through country roads, coming back down. Again, fully capable of going highway speeds, but if you were going to do a 4-hour tour on this at the highway speeds, you're probably going to feel like you're at the top end of the rev range, and it's going to feel a little bit less, comfortable on that kind of ride. But it's very fun, it's very lightweight, and we're going to show you the dash, a whole bunch of things in a little bit. Let's bring the Z400 in and talk about some of the differences of why that one might be great for you. So the Z400 and the Ninja 400, you'll hear me talk about them pretty much interchangeably, and that's because virtually everything from here back is identical on both those bikes. So if you like the Ninja 400 with a little bit more sport bike fairing, or you like this with what they call the naked style bike, or the standard style bike was what they used to call it, then that's fine. I've done videos comparing the two of them. There are reasons to go with one over the other. The seating position is slightly different because of the handlebars. And there are some pros and cons to each. So I've done pretty in-depth videos, probably the most in-depth videos you'll find on the comparisons between the two of those. So make sure you search for that on this channel. If you don't know how to search the channel, just go Peter Lowe 1, that's Peter Lowe O-N-E, and Z400 or Ninja 400. Search that in YouTube and you'll find my channel and you'll be able to find stuff. And again, just subscribe to the channel if you're interested in that. But I'm going to use the Z400 today. First of all, this is new for 2023 paint scheme, a little bit more green, used to be inverted. The black and green used to be different in the past. The reason I like this bike, let's just start, seat height is obviously very approachable. The other thing is it's also a very lightweight bike. Technically this is heavier than that one, at least I believe it is, but it doesn't feel any heavier or doesn't feel that much heavier because again, you're lower to the ground, center of gravity is very low. There's a lot of things on this bike that they do very well for beginners, but the reason I like this bike the best is You will find over and over and over again, experienced riders, mature riders, not just young experienced riders, but mature riders will also like this bike. It's all the bike they need. So you'll always hear from people, you know, you're gonna outgrow that bike. 400cc bikes didn't used to come like this. There's always a reason to want more speed. But what you get here is a bike that handles really well. And both of these bikes, being lighter weight, will allow you to travel and learn how to ride very, very well. And to me, that's a key piece of getting your first beginner's bike, is becoming a better and better rider. I tend to not recommend a cruiser as a first bike. Although they have low seat heights, they don't handle as well. They often don't sort of, you know, steer or brake as well, that kind of thing. They can be heavier. And again, it's up to you if that's what you want, but I think your learning curve grows better on a bike like either of these two as your first bike. So again, do you want to move on from this? Absolutely you could. But many people find that this is all the bike they need and it lasts them a very long time. And that's kind of why I prefer this. I feel like it's a little bit more versatile. The other thing to look for in a first bike is if lots of them have sold, there's more aftermarket support. So if you want a big windshield here, you can get that. If you want a whole bunch of luggage on here, you can get that. You can add some luggage bit to the Supermoto, but this could be a touring bike in 2 years for you. It could be a track bike in 2 years for you. It can do a whole bunch of things because of the aftermarket support, which is something worth considering. A couple little downfalls. This plastic here, nice and shiny, looks pretty good. Don't want to drop it. Again, that exhaust sitting out here, you don't want to drop it. So the Supermoto can probably take a beating if it were to be dropped a little bit more. And you can get things called frame sliders and other things. If you were to drop it in the garage, they should protect most of what you have. But the overall body here is, like most motorcycles, not something you want to drop. But to be fair, very comfortable, low center of gravity, easy to ride bike. So again, good beginner bikes. Now let's talk about some specifics to look for in a beginner bike. So in my opinion, the number one thing you should look for in your braking system of your new motorcycle is ABS brakes. Now I say that knowing that the Supermoto I just showed you does not have them. So there are times where it's fun to not have ABS, to allow that rear wheel to slide around, to allow stoppies, so you do a wheelie on the front wheel, that kind of thing. And again, that Supermoto can do those stunts. So there might be a reason to not have ABS on a bike like that. But for me, I really like having ABS, and I'll tell you why. When I learned to ride, ABS wasn't a thing, and you had to really learn threshold braking. You've learned that in the course and that kind of thing. The problem is when you get in an emergency situation, that's where most people get in trouble, especially newer riders. They can't instinctively brake correctly. And the nice thing is if you're upright on this bike and you jam on the brake levers, front or rear, it doesn't lock up the front or the rear wheel. The ABS will allow it to continue to roll. If you lock up a wheel, you're likely going down. Of course, as the weight transfers to the front, your rear wheel is likely to have very little weight. Sometimes you hit that brake pedal like you do on a car, and of course it locks up. With ABS brakes, it won't. And the same thing with the front wheel. If you jam a whole fistful of that front lever, your wheel can lock up. If that front wheel locks up, you're probably going down. So ABS is one of those things where you can continue to practice to ride. When I had to learn a threshold brake, you know, when you're pulling that front lever a whole bunch, you had to run the risk of your front wheel locking up and potentially going down. ABS is a great teacher because when you're practicing, if you grab a whole bunch of that front brake, you will feel the chatter of that ABS instead of having that wheel lock up. So it allows you to get to your limits, to find out where that limit is without activating the ABS, whereas on a bike without ABS, you find out where the limit is when your front wheel locks up. So it is something that I do recommend, but again, some people don't want it, and there's options out there for you. But the way you can tell if it has ABS, obviously there's stickers somewhere, has this little ring down here. That ring is the sensor sort of here, reads through there, and it can tell front wheel, rear wheel, if they're spinning, that kind of thing. The other thing to look for is just good quality disc brakes like these. Pretty much standard stuff now. Some will have dual discs, some will have single discs. Generally speaking, most modern motorcycles, especially when they're new, are going to have excellent brakes. My first motorcycle had drum brakes in the front, drum brakes in the rear, nowhere near the stopping power of this, and that's another reason to buy a newer bike. You've got modern ABS, not old-fashioned ABS. You've also got modern components here, and again, there's no wear on these components when they're new. Next thing we're going to look at is the engine, and really there's not a lot to show on a video here, so let's just talk about some things that I would look for in a motorcycle. I'm going to talk a lot about power with this 400cc engine, and that's because some 500cc engines actually don't make the power that this 400 does, and of course we all like power, right? Well, the thing with power is you want an engine that builds power evenly, builds power well. And there are a lot of bikes that are really peaky in their power. If you get a modern sport bike, they don't make a lot of torque down low, which is what you really feel when you're driving on the street. They make a lot of horsepower up high, which is what you want when you're driving purely at red line, dragging your knees around corners, and you're going in on a racetrack type environment. So I look for, as a new rider, something that really builds power well, in addition to not being overly powerful. This bike is great because you can really ham on it. If you wanted to wheelie it, you could, but it's hard to accidentally wheelie this bike, but you still have power for things like highway speeds. This bike on YouTube, you can see lots of videos of this thing going like 200 kilometers an hour. I've never taken it that high. Certainly if you get on the highway, it's 110 speed limit here. If you want to drive 120 and need some passing power still, you still have that on this bike, and that's because of the twin cylinder. The other thing that may be a controversial opinion, I would look for liquid cooling. That means there's a radiator out front. A liquid cooled bike is going to help maintain itself a little bit in environments where a new rider might be idling, might be stuck in hot heat, doing various things. It kind of maintains it all, and you'll have either a temperature gauge or a temperature light to warn you of a problem, but it kind of just gives you, one, it can make more power because it can really dial in the temperature control of the engine, but it just kind of gives you a little bit of extra reliability. In theory, it's some extra maintenance. At some point, they'll have to do a fluid change in there, but really as a new bike, beginner bike, that's something that I think is something that you should look for, because I've driven air-cooled bikes and got stuck on a highway on a very, very hot day on a traffic jam and wondered if my bike was going to overheat, and there's no indication. This bike has an indication with that'll tell you it's running fine, which is nice to have. So engine, you can go with what you want. Don't go crazy powerful, but go powerful enough to do what you want to do, and let's move on from there. So let's look at the dash here of the Z400. It is different than the Ninja 400. This one has more of a digital display for the tachometer, but the information given is the same. And this is kind of leading edge beginner bike type stuff, or first bike, returning bike type stuff. And you can kind of see why. First of all, really clear speedometer. There's a temperature gauge over on the far side on the left here. There's a fuel gauge over on the right. There's some information down there. You got an oil light there, so if there's an issue, that kind of thing. This big red light will warn you if something's going on, but it'll tell you in the dash as well. And then you've got some options here. It's got your odometer in there, so we can cycle through trip A, trip B, and back to odometer. And then on this side here, we got the bottom down here. So that is showing your fuel efficiency in kilometers per liter. Now you can do a whole bunch of different settings. I like liters per 100 kilometers. You can do miles per gallon US, miles per gallon UK. You can set that up the way you want, but it's nice to know miles per gallon, fuel efficiency, that kind of thing. So that's your instant fuel efficiency rating. Obviously the bike's not running, so it's not reading anything, but there's instant there. And then there's average there. The AV shows up, so instant and average fuel efficiency. Kind of nice to know how you've done. Again, when you're driving a motorcycle, revving it out, sometimes your tanks are really going to vary. So you get a sense of, when I drive sporty, this is the kind of mileage I get. When I drive economically, this is the kind of mileage you get. And you get a sense of what the bike's going to cost you to own. There's your range, which is your distance to empty. Now you have a fuel gauge. You have a fuel light as well that'll warn you if the fuel is low. But having that range to empty is a guesstimate of how much range is left based on how you have been driving. And that's kind of a nice feature. Again, shouldn't be relied upon as sort of, the full truth. But again, if you're riding aggressively, you'll see this number change. You'll have a better sense of how far you have to go for your next stop compared to if you're riding economically. So that's just kind of a nice thing to have in there as well. And then back to a clock. A clock's always nice to have. There we go. So that's kind of your full setting in there. You've got a tachometer. On this one, it builds a digital bar system that comes up. You saw it when I first turned it on, and it'll read exactly where your RPM is. And then I really like to have a gear indicator. I have never had a gear indicator until the most recent bike that I've had, so it's not like you need it. I'm not saying that, that's a necessity, but it's really nice to have, whether you're a new rider or experienced rider. Not so much for the neutral, which of course has a neutral light, but what you find is when you're coming into a corner, you'll know that you want to be in maybe second gear or third gear in that type of corner. And you're supposed to be able to tell by your revs, but it's just easier to glance down, and especially if you pulled that clutch in already, to know what gear you're in, drop it in second or third, and you'll know where it'll be. You'll know by the feel of how much to rev it to come out of that corner. That just helps you stay really balanced. So I really like a gear indicator, but you don't need one. And we're going to show you the basic dash on the Supermoto as well, just to show you, another version of a beginner bike dash, which doesn't have some of the same equipment here. So back to the KLX 300 SM, that Supermoto. This is a very, very, very basic dash, but it's not the most basic. So over here, again, clear digital speedometer. You've got an odometer over here, which if I cycle through, gives me trip A, trip B, and that's it, back to odometer. You've got a clock over here, that doesn't change. No gear position indicator, no temperature gauge, but you do have a temperature light. Again, if it's liquid cooled, temperature light, which again, if an air-cooled engine starts to overheat, you don't really know. If this one starts to overheat, at least you don't have a temperature gauge, you have a temperature light, you're gonna have a sense of what's going on there. High beam is on right now, so we'll turn that back off. Neutral light right there. So you don't have a gear indicator, but of course you always know if you're neutral. This one, the signal lights are a single light, so whether I do a left or right signal, it's just gonna be the same blinking light there. Basic dash here. One thing I do think you should look for is a tachometer. There are bikes in the Kawasaki lineup, including the KLR 650, which is not really a beginner bike, that doesn't have a tach. And there are other Supermoto dirt bikes that don't have a tach. I think a tach is something you should look for because that's gonna help teach you to ride, get used to the engine as well, and this one has it. So whether you go with a basic dash or a more advanced one, on the beginner bikes, this is kind of where the realm should start. Include the tach, have a good clear speedometer, easy to read gauges. I like the liquid cooling with the temperature light at least, but again, the Z400 Ninja 400 does have more information, and that's kind of leading class for a beginner bike. So now let's talk about the clutch on your brand new bike. If you've done your motorcycle training, you spent a lot of time riding that clutch in and out, that kind of thing. You're gonna notice a difference in the feel of various clutch pulls on various bikes. This one has what's called a slipper and assist clutch. So let's talk about the slipper and assist clutch because it was brought in for the racetrack, but I think it's a great beginner feature. So it's the kind of thing you may not test out in a motorcycle training course, but it may become very real in your real world riding where you're picking up speed and driving faster. So let's just talk slipper and assist. Usually I talk slipper first, but we'll do the assist function. An assist clutch has the assist part of it is really a byproduct of the design, and it has a very light clutch pull. This one has a very light clutch pull. So does the Supermoto, even though that doesn't have a slipper and assist clutch. So lighter bikes, smaller bikes tend to have lighter clutch pulls, but this one is quite light. I like that for driving around town. For a smaller bike where you're shifting gears a lot, it's just a little bit less pressure to shift. It feels great. But the assist part, a slipper and assist clutch, is something that I might want in a beginner bike. It was never available when I started riding, but what it does is as you're downshifting, if you mess up that downshift, or in a racing environment, if you do a really aggressive downshift where you go from a high gear, high RPM, and you're really revving that engine and you're downshifting, sometimes when that engine speed and you pop that clutch, it has so much engine braking that the rear wheel can actually slide a little bit because it's engine braking, that rear wheel weight transfer, it lightens up the rear wheel and the rear wheel can slide. I've had that happen. I've done that on purpose and by accident and felt that little wiggle and slide. It can cause you to go down, especially if you're not used to it. So what a slipper and assist clutch does, the slipper part, instead of that wheel sliding, it works to allow the clutch to slide. So again, no system is perfect, but the idea is it kind of just allows that engine to find its space without the skid. It's a safety feature that I would look for, especially if you start to get into more aggressive riding, but even if you're just going higher speeds and you're zipping down through the gears, you miss a shift, do something else, you've popped that clutch out, it can keep your wheel in traction with the ground. And again, some older bikes don't have it, some newer bikes do, so it's another reason to buy a newer bike. Between the ABS and that, you've got two safety features that on an up-to-date new bike can really help you when you're riding. But again, light clutch pull is good on any bike. Lighter bikes, smaller engines tend to have lighter clutch pulls. So again, something to keep in mind. So another thing to be aware of on beginner bikes is lighting. A lot of bikes, especially older bikes, including this Supermoto, will have a halogen style light where I can flash the high beam up like that. Halogen lights are cheaper. They use a little bit more electricity, which is neither here nor there for most of these bikes. They can handle it. But they also, again, if you drop the bike, it's a little cheaper to replace. There's no real benefit to the halogen light on a modern bike compared to an LED headlight, which is what you get here on the Z400. I really like LED headlights. I've been a part of the auto industry for a while, and one of the things that people don't mention about LED lights is that whiter color that you see on your screen. That whiter color is closer to daylight, and that allows your eyes to recognize what you see better because your brain is used to processing things in the light that it's familiar with. So it allows you to tell if that is a rock on the side of the road or a rodent on the side of the road, those kind of things. So while it, to me, looks cooler, it does have a slight safety advantage, which may matter to you. Something like the Z400, they have a little trigger to flash your high beam. It can really get attention. Headlight is often more about being seen than just seeing, but you want to make sure it has a good spread of light. You can't always test bikes out at night, so you can do your review online to figure out which ones. These ones have really good spread. That one's got a good spread as well, but this one does appear brighter. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're doing a lot of nighttime riding, you may find a benefit in the LED light. If you're doing daytime riding, not a lot of LED or not a lot of nighttime riding, this one's probably going to be just fine because the headlight is more about being seen if you're driving during the day, and the headlight's more about seeing if you're driving at night. So if you want to be seen, either of these are going to be good. If you want to see more, an LED light might be a benefit for you. The other benefit with the LED brake light over here, I think this one has an LED brake light. Yeah, LED brake light is a little bit more of an instant on that can catch people's attention better. This one's not so much instant on, it has a bit of a glow on. You can tell the difference between that, so there may be an advantage there, but it's generally just styling at that point. So I'm filming at a bit of an awkward angle right now, and if you're a new rider, Kawasaki has one feature that's exclusive to Kawasaki that you don't have on other models, and it's a positive neutral finder. So if you've done your course and you're finding that it's difficult to always find neutral, what Kawasaki does is as you're coming to a stop, you can continue to press down and get down to first gear. Once you're in first gear at a stop, Kawasaki's system will not let you lift into second gear while you're stopped. So if you're at a stoplight and you've pushed all the way down, the only way it will lift up is to allow you to get into neutral. It will not allow you into gear. So it's really handy for people who are having trouble finding that neutral, that want to make sure they know where to find it. Again, once you've come to a stop, you lift straight up. And again, not every Kawasaki bike has that. The two that I'm showing you today do have that, but many do, and that neutral finder is really simple. Like I said, come to a stop, lift up, and you're in neutral no matter what. You're not into second gear. It's super easy to find. So if it feels like I'm really favoring the Z400, that's because I've been looking at it from a spec sheet perspective. And there are spec sheet things that this bike does better. For instance, those spoked wheels that you see here, they're used on dirt bikes and adventure bikes. They're used on those for a reason. They're stronger. If you're jumping off curbs or something like that, these are going to be better than something like that. We can go spec sheet comparison all day long. This one can take some luggage. It has a little hooks down here. You can add stuff. You can even add a rear rack on here. You can add accessories on here. So spec sheet comparisons are all interesting things, but the reason you should get a good beginner bike or a beginner bike at all is you should buy a bike that you like, and it should help you develop your skills. And that's where both of these bikes are strong. So remember when I said this one can be used for stunts? Well, the thing with using a bike for stunts is you really want to know where the limits of the bike are. And this bike, it's very easy to discover those limits, to understand when you're approaching those limits. And that makes it a really great bike to ride and to learn on, because any beginner bike should teach you. Now, there are style differences here physically that create style differences in riding. This is going to be a great bike for around town, in town, country roads, like I said. This bike's going to be better for those, it's still great around town, but it really excels on those country roads, those sweepers, those nice, longer, higher speed turns, and it's a little bit more big highway capable. So if you want to go down to those country roads that are 2 hours away on the big highway, this one's going to be a little bit more comfortable to do that. And that's the thing you have to keep in mind, is that styling differences can lead to riding style differences. But the reason I like this style over a cruiser, again, is because you are centered on the bike, your gravity is better, and they're going to develop your riding skill better. You're going to understand how to ride better learning on these bikes. Now again, nothing wrong with getting a cruiser as your first bike, but if you're looking to develop your skills, to me, starting on something like this is great. So let's talk about one final thing, outgrowing a bike. It's a term that I don't use, but it is a term that this bike fights against very well. I think there's lots of reasons to have low displacement bikes. I think they're a blast. There's a Versys 300 over there, which is slower than this bike, which I would love to have in my garage. The 400, again, we talked about power, good power. There may be a time that you want to go to a faster bike. What I think is great about this is this bike will do everything you want it to, including having the speed that you need from day one. This one with a little bit lower top speed, if you're doing a lot of highway riding, you may feel you want to move on from. So having an understanding of the types of riding you do, if you're never going on the major highways or very rarely, or just going on an exit or 2 or 3 or 5, this bike will be perfectly fine. But if you're doing those multi-hour trips as well, you're not going to have an issue with saying, oh, I should have bought a different bike. And of course, that's what we're all trying to avoid, buying that different bike. Both these bikes are going to last you a long time if you want to ride in the style that fits them. But there's one final factor, and it's the dealership you deal with. I film here with Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals. I have a bias towards them. I think they're the absolute best dealer in the country, and your partnership when you buy a bike with your dealer really matters. And I don't just say that they're the best dealer in the country for no reason. They're the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer, so there's lots of people that feel they're the best dealer in the country. And a dealership makes a difference in your ownership experience. So make sure you work well with them, that you feel comfortable with the dealer you're buying from, because they're going to make a big difference in your ownership experience. So if you have any questions about beginner bikes, finishing the course, buying a bike, let me know in the comments below, and I'll come back to you with a video answer and with comments, and enjoy your first ride.